welcome to another Tweedy Pubs video. Arundel in West Sussex, on the edge of the South Downs National Park, a famously picturesque town known for its castle, its cathedral and an absurdly quaint looking post office. But are its pubs any good? That's what I'm here to find out. Pub number one, starting at the top of town, it's the St Mary's Gate Inn. Cheers from the St Mary's Gate Inn. It has an impressive setting next to the cathedral here. And quick side note on the cathedral. Some of you may be slightly bemused that Arundel is a town and yet has a cathedral. But it is of course a myth that a cathedral is an indicator of city status. There are examples of cities which do not have cathedrals, like Bath for example, and towns which do have cathedrals, like Guildford. To add to that, it's also a Catholic cathedral, so it's a whole different system anyway. Although built in the 1870s, it was only relatively recently granted cathedral status in 1965. Here's the pub marked on the 1890s Ordnance Survey map, and at that time the cathedral is labelled as St Philip Neri's Roman Catholic Church. Also nearby, St Mary's Gate is labelled, from which the pub takes its name. This was formerly the town gate, which was made redundant when the London Road was rerouted close to here. Inside looks a little bit modern today. I'm not sure there's much original fabric. Here's a quick look at the bar counter. I wondered if there might be a slightly older bit of bar back fitting here, but perhaps I was trying a bit too hard. There are a couple of brick fireplaces in one or two places, and happily also a nice beer garden, which I think from one or two corners maybe gives you another glimpse of that cathedral. Again, I think the main draw of this pub is its setting next to the cathedral there, and standing outside it at the front you can get some really nice views. This is a Hall and Woodhouse pub. It seemed slightly surprising to me initially. We're in Sussex, but I suppose it's West Sussex. We're not a million miles from Dorset here. We've got Hampshire in between us. On the bar there were a larger number of hand pumps, but just two of them in service currently. One, I forget the name, something Venom is it? It's a nettle ale, which I was intrigued by, but on nosing that I thought came across as quite citrus. The other was Badger or Hall and Woodhouse's Thirsty Ferret. The hops are bordering on stuff that I wouldn't normally like, possibly Austrian, Slovenian, is it Celia? A bit like Styrian Goldings. Centennial is a mix of Brewer's Gold, Fuggles and East Kent Golding, which all sound very safe to me, but it is apparently sometimes likened to Cascade. Oh well. Didn't really have any other option. I think I may have been trying a bit too hard to convince myself that the Thirsty Ferret there was in fact okay. I think towards the end I did start to get a twang of grapefruit and I left the other half of it. Quite a hilly place, Arundel. A lot of the roads that run parallel to this one, this is called Parsons Hill. A lot of these roads are called something or other hill. The ones that, funny enough, go up a hill. This one runs down by the side of the cathedral and hopefully will take me to the next pub, which is the King's Arms. Pub number two, and this is apparently the oldest pub in Arundel. It's the King's Arms. Cheers from the King's Arms. A little bit difficult to find a quiet spot to sit because it's happily quite busy on a, was it 5 o'clock on a Tuesday? Good to see. The current building is listed, and Historic England say that it's probably mid-18th century, although it does have some late 19th century alterations. The door that leads out onto King's Arms Hill, the road that has taken its name from the pub, presumably, has a saloon bar sign on it. What on my visit was the most popular bar is the original saloon bar. There was another slightly quieter bar round one side, which I think would originally have been the public bar. The lady behind the bar said that does get a bit busier at different times. Tends to be younger people because that's where the darts board is. Is that the jukebox in there? Other entertainments in there potentially. As noted, the road at one side is named King's Arms Hill, and you can see that on the 1890s Ordnance Survey map, although for some reason the pub itself is not marked at that time with the usual PH. However, if we wind forward just a little bit to the 1910s OS map, you can see it marked there with a PH. There is this nice bit of outside drinking space lining King's Arms Hill. Interesting bar counters. As noted, there is a public bar and a saloon bar. Both have a similar sort of style of bar counter with matchboard panelling interspersed with these quirky little pillars with possibly Corinthian capitals. The lady behind the bar said that possibly they're a relatively modern thing, because when she first knew this pub 40 years ago, she thought that the layout of the bar counter was slightly different at that time. Nice fireplaces, was a bit difficult to get a shot of those, and a collection of charming, quirky signs on the walls. Perhaps I can be showing you a selection of those while I'm babbling on. It's very much an independent pub, as described by camera, very much a drinker's pub. No food served per se. There is a very generous sign on the outside saying if you want to bring your own food, you're welcome to do so. I think they even say they will provide you with cutlery should you so require. Typically 4 real ales on the bar. I went for a pint of HSB. Pub number 3, the Eagle, at the bottom of Baker's Arms Hill, which suggests that there was at one time a pub somewhere around here called the Baker's Arms as well. Arundel has a rich history of brewing, and this pub was originally the brewery tap for the Eagle Brewery, which I think started in something like the 1730s and finally ceased brewing operations in 1910. The pub, the Eagle, is at the top of, can we see that over there? Brewery Hill, the aptly named Brewery Hill. And if you walk down to the bottom of that, there is still a remnant of the old brewery buildings there. There is an Eagle Brewery yard, and I believe you can still see some of the old brewery buildings. I'll perhaps pop down there in a moment to take a look. Let's take a look at the exterior of the pub. It's a brick building with a run of 3 gables onto Tarrant Street. The 2 larger gables have alcoves in them with eagles, per the name of the pub. In one of the gables there is a slightly projecting window just above where I am now. I think we can call that an oriel window probably. In between the floors are brick bands. I think they're possibly called string coursers, are they? They have a cross-shaped design and some flowers in them, which is slightly reminiscent of styles of pubs you often see in the late Victorian, early Edwardian period. Bit of a difficult pub to do any filming at. I made an executive judgment on the interior that perhaps the locals might not particularly want me to be filming the back of their heads. But I do think it's quite a handsome building. Pub number 4, and it's the Red Lion on the High Street, the main shopping street of Arundel. Cheers from the Red Lion. A couple of sources say that this pub is potentially 300 years old. I couldn't find much in the way of newspaper accounts, etc., going back to the 1700s, I suppose that would be, but there is a mention from 1848 in the newspaper of an individual uttering base coin, which means trying to pass off counterfeit currency here in the Red Lion, and also in the White Hart, which hopefully we're going to see later. Then later in 1891 there is an advert for the pub as a venue for bean feasts. This is a custom that seems to have largely died out, but traditionally this meant an outing for the employees of a given company, typically in the summer. It usually involved a scenic location and a meal, and in this particular case, beautiful Arundel is proposed as the venue. The name is a bit misleading, and it isn't a thrifty vegetarian repast, but in fact traditionally a goose. The name bean comes from the fact that a particular part of a goose's bill looks like a broad bean, apparently. As an aside, eventually bean feast just came to mean a jolly good time, and one nickname for that was Beano. That's actually where the name of the comic featuring Dennis the Menace and co comes from. Here's the pub marked on that 1890s OS map around the time of that advert for the bean feasts. Taking a look at the exterior, it's a mixture of grey and red brick. I think this is Neo-Georgian in style, looking at all those flat brick arches and those dentils underneath the roof. Therefore it's probably an interwar rebuild. Some sources do mention a rebuild in the 1930s. An old photo shows it looking quite different to how it does today. Note the bay windows there, for example. They're no longer present. Looking inside, again, this is another fairly modern interior. That bar counter could possibly just about be from that 1930s rebuild. Other than that, as I say, fairly modern. Here's a look at what was on the bar lineup. I went for a pint of Timothy Taylor's Landlord. Feels a bit of a shame when down here in Sussex to be drinking something from so far up north. Still haven't yet found a pub on today's outing that is serving Harvey's Sussex Best. The previous one had it, but it was off. So looking forward to one of those later, hopefully at the White Hart. Pub number 5. I know this isn't technically a pub, it's a hotel. Well, it's sort of a bit of both. The Norfolk Arms has a bar within it called the Norfolk Tap, and it is on cameras. Hello. That's a bit nicer than the previous people who shouted something to me out of the window. It wasn't quite so friendly or as reproducible on YouTube. Pub number 5, the Norfolk Arms. I know this is not exactly a pub, it's a hotel, but it does have a pub-esque-ish, possibly, bar inside, the Norfolk Tap. Cheers from the Norfolk Arms. This is, I think, the main hotel of the town, and it takes its name from the Duke of Norfolk, who has his seat here at Arundel in Sussex. Bit confusing, isn't it? You'd really think that the Duke of Norfolk would have his seat somewhere in Norfolk, but that is frequently not the case. The Duke of Devonshire, for example, has his seat at Chatsworth House, which is in Derbyshire, and there are many more examples like that. You can see the Norfolk Arms in this presumably late Victorian photo, and it's nice to see how much the surrounding area remains largely unchanged. Around that time, the Norfolk Arms also appears on the Ordnance Survey map, and it's labelled there as hotel. It's a listed building dating to the 1780s, and it's built in red brick. Quite a handsome bit of architecture, quite symmetrical when you look at it face on. Even a hint of the Palladian perhaps, with that large central window on the first floor, but the whole thing is also built on a slope. It is, as noted, very much more of a hotel than a pub, but it does have this bar called the Norfolk Tap, which operates somewhat as a pub, I suppose. It was for a time operated by the Arundel brewery. I think today it has once again been taken back under control of the hotel itself. It's back under their wing, but they still sell, I believe, at least one beer from the local brewery, the Arundel brewery, and that's what I'm having, this Arundel Best Bitter. Incredibly malty on the nose. Really strong smell of malt. I don't really get much of a hop aroma to that at all, really. The interior of the Norfolk Tap is very modern. It is, after all, a hotel bar rather than a genuine pub, but the hotel provides all this courtyard space, this outdoor drinking space, some of which is covered as well if it happens to be raining. It does have this nice old feeling of a traditional sort of coaching inn. There's that archway coming through here, and presumably some of this area towards the back would have at one time been stabling. Now it's given over to more accommodation. Pub number 6, the Swan. I would do the usual cheers from the Swan, but I couldn't find a good space inside the pub to do any talking to camera, and they don't seem to have a garden or any outside space. I wasn't really sure if it would be appropriate to drink on the street either. It is actually a listed building, and Historic England say that it dates to the mid-19th century. It's quite a long description that they give, and two things jump out to me. Just about see it in the background from here. Those attic dormer windows, I think they're quite cute, and also the vermiculated keystones over some of the windows. At least one set of those windows looks a little bit Palladian to me. You have a central slightly larger window flanked by two slightly smaller windows, and it's all very symmetrical. Vermiculated, that's quite a satisfying word, isn't it? It refers to this wavy pattern that you can see in these keystones, and it's sometimes described as worm-eaten. It is down at the bottom of one of the hills that lead up to the castle, and you can get quite a nice view of the sign of the pub and the castle from here. Inside, it's a fairly modern pub interior. Again, not a huge amount to write home about. And on one of the walls there is a display of cricket memorabilia, presumably the local side. It's a Fuller's pub. Here is a look at the beer lineup on the bar. I was going to go for London Pride because I just wanted something a little bit milder at this stage of the proceedings, but that was off, so I went for HSB instead. Pub number, I think this is 7. Have I lost track now? This is the White Hart, and this is the one and only Harvey's owned or Harvey's tied pub here in Arundel. Cheers from the White Hart, and finally a pint of Harvey's Sussex Best. Predominantly red brick. There's some tiling on the upper floors and some large, very noticeable gables. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I could imagine it's late 19th century. Another pub where it was a little bit difficult to get interior shots, so here's a couple of odd excerpts. Camera describes the interior as pleasant, modern, retro decor with scrubbed wooden tables and posters of old breweries. As I say, it's the one Harvey's pub in Arundel, so if that in itself is not a draw, then I don't know what will be. It's also the only pub on the, how would you describe it, the east or the south side of the Arun. The only pub on this side of the river. All the other pubs and the main town itself are over there on the other side of the river. And we're quite close to what were effectively the docks. Arundel was a port town, despite being some way inland. The Arun was very much navigable up to this point, at least by the Middle Ages, perhaps not if you go further back in time when the tidal ranges changed somewhat. It isn't marked on the 1890s Ordnance Survey map, but it is close to the Swallow Brewery, and I wonder if potentially there may have been a similar relationship to that we saw earlier at the Eagle, where that was the brewery tap for the Eagle Brewery. Possibly at some time this may have had a similar role for the Swallow Brewery. It's 7:30 now, and it is getting to that point in the proceedings where I'm actually a bit hungry. So I noticed that there's a fish and chip shop across the road, and the pub itself does not serve food. I went in there and asked how the pub feels about people eating fish and chips on the pub tables outside, and they said it's fine as long as you've got a drink. Trawler's fish and chips. Just having chips. They are very good. I think I may have exhausted all the pubs in the centre of Arundel. There is one more that slightly has piqued my curiosity, the Black Rabbit, but it's not really in Arundel proper. It's in somewhere like Offham, is it? It says 1.25 miles, so it's a good 25-minute walk. It's about 8 o'clock now. I assume sunset is 45 minutes from now, so it seems like it might be a reasonable thing to do, to walk along the road and or river to get there, and maybe there'll be some nice views along the way. Did I already cover the fact that there are two breweries in Arundel, the Fauna Brewery, I think it's called, and the Arundel Brewery, and they're both closed on Monday to Wednesdays. I think both of them don't start until Thursday-ish. I'm here on a Tuesday, so neither of those were an option. Didn't really seem like my sort of place anyway. Very modern style breweries have arrived. I don't think it was quite 25 minutes in the end, felt more like 20. Anyway, I'm here at the Black Rabbit in Offham. It is outside of Arundel, but I wanted to include this, as I said, because I think it's in a very picturesque setting. Cheers from the Black Rabbit, as captured by the artist Alfred Robert Quinton in the 1920s. I thought this was a particularly captivating, I think it's a watercolour, I'm not really an art critic, I wouldn't know. Of course we can't really see it in quite that light because I'm on this side of the river and that was presumably painted from across the river. And you can also get a view of Arundel Castle from here along the River Arun. It's another Hall and Woodhouse pub today. They seem to have two pubs in Arundel and thereabouts. Here the beer selection at least had one more of Hall and Woodhouse's beer range, so I went for a pint of Tanglefoot. It's not quite the same as it used to be. I don't think it ever used to be this pale, but hopefully the hops are at least still vaguely traditional. The name, the Black Rabbit, is quite intriguing, isn't it? It's quite an unusual pub name. I don't recall encountering a Black Rabbit pub before. The lady behind the bar, who may possibly have been the manager, suggested that it was actually to do with the coal shipments that used to go along the River Arun. We may have touched on previously when we were still in Arundel that it was effectively an inland port. It was used for shipping goods, and apparently coal barges would stop off here and pile the coal up here, and that's why, I'm not quite sure the rabbit bit came in, but at least the black part somehow relates to coal. I have left the Black Rabbit now. Beautiful riverside setting. I'm not sure I really managed to capture that particularly well because of course if you're on one side of the riverside you don't get that panoramic view as painted by, what was he called, Alfred Robert Quinton. So heading back into Arundel now, and that's pretty much it in terms of pubs. I am feeling a little bit disappointed, if I'm honest, with Arundel. It's the morning after, and I'm here at Arundel station waiting for the train back to London. I feel as though I should have another go at the conclusion to that outing to Arundel because I don't know, I'm not sure I really managed to make a completely coherent summary last night. We'll start by saying Arundel is undoubtedly a beautiful, very picturesque town. Those vistas of the cathedral, of the castle, looking up and down those hills, every now and again you get a glimpse of crenellations and Gothic spires and everything, and I can absolutely see the appeal from the external appearance of the place. Really beautiful. But I have 3 issues with why I think it's possibly not a particularly great destination for pubs, sadly. First of all, there was definitely a bit of an undertone of aggression from the locals. I go into these pubs and I try to film as unobtrusively as possible. I don't ever want to get anyone in shot who doesn't want to be in shot. I always ask behind the bar if it's okay to take internal footage and all of that, and if they ask questions about what it is I'm doing, I explain full detail. Always try to be nice to the people in the pubs, the people running the pubs, so on. And, you know, sometimes I get a few scowls from the locals, and I sort of get that, and perhaps, as I say, sometimes that's in my head, but at least one individual leaving one of the pubs hung out the window of his friend's car and shouted a stream of obscenities at me while I was just standing in front of the pub, not bothering anyone as far as I could tell, talking about the architecture of the building. I get that it's a touristy place, and some of the locals probably resent out-of-towners coming in and taking pictures of everything and all that, but as I say, I was trying very hard to be unobtrusive. So that was a bit of a mark against Arundel. The interiors were almost all very disappointing. It is telling that there isn't a single pub in Arundel that makes it onto CAMRA's list of historic pub interiors. And I don't think there is a single pub here that has been untouched in the last 30, 40, 50 years. They've all had refurbs, and very modern refurbs, and there was very little character, sadly, in the interiors of those pubs. And one notable exception, probably the King's Arms. I don't think it is a particularly old interior, but at least had a sort of pubby charm to it, and that is a pub that I would go back to. That was definitely the best of the lot on just about all fronts. But everywhere else, there's a lot of chain-owned pubs here, brewery-owned pubs, tied pubs, and they've had, I think, really disappointing, really banal modern makeovers with all the usual tropes of the turquoise paint and the, you know what I mean. That was disappointing for a town that has the second highest number of listed buildings in West Sussex. The complete lack of care for the interiors of those pubs is really disappointing, in my opinion. Thirdly, the beer was a bit underwhelming, if I'm honest. Again, the King's Arms probably the best of the lot. I got the sense even there they were suggesting that they were having a bit of a bad day of it. They had some casks that they couldn't put on because they were struggling to settle. I don't know, every pub suffers like that, that's fair enough. But the rest of it was a lot of tied houses, a lot of chain pubs, 2 Hall and Woodhouse pubs, both of which I thought put on a particularly poor show yesterday. Struggled to find anything from their range that I particularly wanted to drink. So there you go, sorry for the whinge, I think my train's here. Arundel, beautiful town, beautiful buildings, beautiful exteriors, beautiful views. The pub's a bit of a letdown, I'm afraid. Thanks very much for watching. See you on the next one.